Hi, I'm Hilary Stohs-Krause. I'm really excited to be at this conference. I actually have a lot of Nebraska ties, even though I currently live in Madison, Wisconsin. I'll be talking about a lot of those ties during this talk. It's a bummer we can't all be in person, but I know that I've got some friends from former lives who are here. And again, just really excited to be virtually back in Nebraska. So I'm going to be talking about how I got out of my own way and found the happy path in tech. And to do that, we have to start at the very beginning. So this is me when I was 12 years old with my identical twin sister. At the time, I was really into anything girls' rule related. This was like the mid-90s. Friendship bracelets. I'm pretty sure that I'm wearing a friendship bracelet I made as a choker in this photo. And oddly Russian literature, because we had a very weird library at my middle school. I was also really into Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I loved it so much that actually my twin sister and I made a fan site devoted to it. It looked very similar to this. Unfortunately, ours is no longer live, but we had a counter, we had a guest book, we were part of web rings, we had awards, we had fanfic. I mean, all the classic trappings of like early 90s websites. This was also my first foray into programming. And I do want to take a quick second here to note that Just Whedon has turned out to be a terrible person, which definitely makes my fandom feel more problematic. But at the time, you know, none of that was the thing that we knew. And this was something that I was obsessed with in the way that only a 12-year-old can be obsessed. And on the show, there was a character, Willow, who was really into programming, into computers. You know, it's computer age, nerds are in. That was kind of her take on things. But at the time, in the real world, only a certain type of nerd was in, which is boys and men. So what did programmers look like in pop culture in the years leading up to and during the time that I was discovering programming as a tween? You'll notice a common pattern that emerges. Right? So Tron, War Games, Weird Science, Jurassic Park, Independence Day, Office Space, Matrix, all of these programmers in movies from ones that I have featured from 1982 to 1999 are pretty much all white dudes, or at least, you know, pass for white. There was a documentary that came out in 1985, Hackers, Wizards of the Electronic Age, which just sounds really dated now, but it featured 19 programmers. One of them was a woman. Now, there were some women programmers in pop culture at this time. So we're going to look at some of those. For example, The Net came out in 1995. Young Americans was a TV show that aired in the summer of 2000. And then Hackers, of course, came out in 1995. And as I mentioned earlier, naturally, there was Willow. But if we look back at these other examples, first, the character that Sandra Bullock played in The Net was sad, isolated, lonely. She didn't have a social life, not exactly something that you aspire to. The character from Young Americans in the middle was actually pretending to be a boy. Yes, that is Kate Manning. And the character that Angelina Jolie played in Hackers, while a total badass, you know, was very androgynous, and all of her compatriots were again men. But more important than, or maybe not more important, but as important as the messages that I was receiving at the time as an impressionable youth from pop culture was the very real messages that I was getting in my own life. So despite the fact that we had programming classes at my high school, no teacher ever suggested that I check it out, even though I had really high scores in math. So I went into journalism instead. I got a degree at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, you know, worked at newspapers around the country. And after a stint at a newspaper in Amarillo, Texas, a few years of freelance print and web journalism, and then bartending, because journalism does not pay, I found myself working as a radio reporter at Nebraska State NPR station. And so before I get farther into this part of my story, I do want to say that this is how the environment was when I was there. And that was going on 8 years ago. So I don't want, while the experience that I had is valid, I don't want my story to make people think that that's how it is still. just to clear that up. But this was the team when I started, and actually we're missing one white gentleman from this picture. This probably looks familiar to a lot of folks who work in tech, right? Surrounded by primarily white men. This was the first job I ever had where on my first day, I walk into the newsroom, I'm meeting my colleagues, and I think to myself, oh, I'm the diversity hire. I was the youngest on staff. I was the only woman who was a reporter in the news department, and I was the only at least out queer person. I was also the only contract worker on an otherwise full-time team. I was hired primarily to do traditional radio pieces, but my background with web-based journalism, I think, was also something that they were really interested in. They wanted me to use that experience and those skills to kind of push the station more, on the digital path. Because this is a time when a lot of news publications were sort of realizing like, oh, the internet is not going away. We should probably do something about that, but none of us really understand it. So one of the first things that I had to do was put together this document, which literally taught my coworkers HTML. At the time, the CMS that we were using, the content management system, only accepted raw HTML. Oh, I think someone might have their mic on, just FYI. Only accepted raw HTML. And so we wanted to do, everything from paragraphs to bolding to subheads. We had to use tables to put in images. This was old school. Naturally, none of my colleagues knew HTML because why would they? And so one of the first tasks that I had was to teach basic HTML so that we could actually format our news articles online. The longer I was there, the more that I started to be able to do more interesting projects at the intersection of journalism and tech. So for example, one year we looked at every place within the state that we had done reporting for stories, and we created this map where you could click on the pin and then see which pieces, relied on reporting from that area. We did a live elections map for election night. So by district, you could click and it would update automatically as we pulled numbers from the state to show you real-time results. And I really enjoyed this work, and I felt like I was good at it. I started getting awards for the pieces that I had been doing. I had work that aired nationally on NPR, even though this gig was my first time doing professional radio. But you wouldn't know it from how I was treated by some of my coworkers. So this was my colleagues who was an ally, and I was venting with him one time about how some of our other coworkers weren't doing the things that I asked them to with regard to digital aspects of their work. And I was just kind of complaining, I just wanted to vent, get it off my chest. And I will never forget this. He looked at me and he said, think about it from their perspective. You come into the office, you tell them to do everything different. You're just this young whippersnapper, and you're a girl to boot. And I tell that story now, and I think back on it, and I'm like, that's so problematic, right? Not that he told me, because he was just, it was actually kind of helpful, right? And he didn't feel that way. But that attitude is so problematic. And tying into that is the issue that I had all of this responsibility with my role, but no authority. And unfortunately was not getting support from those with authority. But anyone who's experienced any kind of microaggressions, you just get used to it. You get used to the frustrations. You've been dealing with it for a long time anyway, right? It's not like I didn't deal with gender or age or any of those kinds of issues only at work, right? That was, especially as a bartender, like don't get me started. So you just kind of think, well, it's mostly a good job. I like the work that I'm doing. I do have some good coworkers. It's fine, right? Like this will happen at any job. Like I can just move past that. I can just get used to it, do what I can, not worry about what I can't. Then I did a story about women in computer science in 2013. Part of the story focused on a community college that had a staff that was entirely women in their CS department, but their student body for the CS department was only 10% women, which is lower than even the national average, which is like 17 to 20%. So I went and talked with the staff, I talked with some of the students, and I was trying to figure out like, where is this discrepancy coming from? And this was really the first time that I personally was aware of the homogeny in tech. I think especially back then, almost 10 years ago, we just didn't have the same focus on it that we do now. And so, and especially not working in tech really, it just wasn't something that I was even aware of. And through reporting the story, started to see how large this problem is and the impacts that it has. And I thought to myself, someone should really do something about this. Like, why aren't there more women working in tech? I used to like tech. Should I do that again? Like, I did it as a kid and I really liked it. And immediately I was like, no, that was a long time ago. You don't actually know any coding. You just know some HTML. Everything you know is very random. You couldn't get a real job with it. Like, nope, you should just stay where you are because you have a good job and it has good benefits and it's fine. That's someone else's mantle to pick up, right? Someone else can solve that problem. 2 months later, we had a consultant surveying the entire organization, and part of their job was to review the way that we did digital marketing and digital integration. Had a meeting at the end of her purview where she was going to share her results. And I was one of the only women in that meeting. And she's going through department by department. She gets to news department, which is where I worked. And she says, okay, I see that the news department has a Tumblr. Whose idea was that? And at least in my memory, every head in the room turned and looked at me. I kind of raised my hand. And I'm waiting for her to tell me everything I'm doing wrong with it and how that's a waste of my time. And, it's inappropriate for a news station, something like that, right? I'm just waiting for her to tell me why this was a bad idea. And instead, she looked at me and she says, this is brilliant. She's like, normally I come to these places and I have to coax and cajole people into doing things like this. And your department already had it started. And it's branded appropriately. It has fresh content. It's updated regularly. It's relevant to the work that you're doing as a department. Like, great job. Like, that's just excellent. Now, I had to go to meetings for multiple months to convince the department that having a Tumblr was a good idea. So I thought, this is great, right? Sometimes you just need someone from the outside to give that external validation, to show, yes, we are doing this right, give that confirmation. So I'm thinking the rest of that meeting, I'm on cloud nine. I'm like, great. All my work, all of my, butting my head against the wall, like pushing for what I really feel is a good thing to do. All of that's worth it because now they're going to see that I was right all along. And I'll have more leverage. They'll give me more freedom to explore some of these projects. Like, this will be great. No one said anything to me after that meeting. No one said, hey, you were right. Sorry that we didn't trust your instinct. Nothing. No one said a thing. And in that moment, I knew I was going to quit. And I did. And it was liberating. I didn't have any job lined up. I didn't know what I was going to do in my career. I didn't know if I even wanted to stay in journalism, but it felt so good to just say goodbye to an environment that for me was very toxic and demoralizing in a lot of ways. So I took kind of a grown-up gap year. I nannied, I bartended, and then I circled back to that idea of going into tech. I researched and applied to boot camps everywhere from San Francisco to Austin to Nashville. And in the end, I ended up attending Omaha Code School. I loved it. This is one of the best experiences of my life. And I do think it's important here to note that I had a lot of privilege in being able to quit a full-time job with benefits to go back to school. Part of it is at that time you could still buy catastrophic life insurance for super cheap. So that's what I did. I had very little savings because, again, I was working as a journalist. So I was able to borrow money from a family member to pay the tuition for the boot camp. But it was so great, and I'm so grateful that I had those advantages and that I was able to do this. I made amazing friends, some of who I still stay in touch with, send Christmas cards to, see at conferences. It was a really fantastic community. When I graduated, I started looking for an internship. At the time, the plan was to move to my twin sister city, Madison, and then we would move together to Austin, Texas. That didn't happen. It turns out Madison is a pretty amazing city. I just fell in love with it. And I fell in love with my job at 10-4 Consulting, where I started as an intern. For all that Madison felt very different from Nebraska, lakes, trees, green, just a different culture, some things did feel oddly similar to my last career. such as my new team. I don't know if anyone sees a resemblance here. So when I first interviewed with 10 Forward, they offered me a junior developer position. I specifically asked for an internship instead because I expected myself to fail. And I wanted to have space where I would be psychologically safe doing so, right? I expected to be a terrible programmer and thought that they would have lower expectations of an intern than a junior developer. And again, I look back on that now and I think, who seeks a demotion before they've even started? But I did, right? I mean, everything in my career until that point told me that my instincts were wrong and I wasn't going to do a good job, or that at least that was the messaging that I was going to receive. And so I wanted people to expect me to do a bad job so that when I did a bad job, I wouldn't get in trouble or whatever you have. I also did not want responsibility because, again, I'd been burned by my previous experience where I was given a responsibility, but no authority. So I said, nope, I'm just going to be a programmer for the rest of my life. I'm just going to write code. I'm never going to be a manager. I'm not going to be in charge of anyone. I'm not going to spearhead any initiatives. Like, that just did not work out for me last time when I tried. So I'm just going to keep my head down, do my work, call it good. That started to change a little as I became more engaged and invested in the community, though I still told all of my friends that management was not for me. I was not going to do that track. I was just going to stick with programming. Instead, over the next couple of years, I focused on adjacent career interests. My friend Ashley and I went to Write Speak Code, which is a national traveling conference that is for marginalized genders in tech, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. I cannot recommend enough. And that was a turning point for me in my career. It was one of the first times that I was surrounded by women and other femmes in tech. And it normalized not only being a woman in tech, but also being early career in tech and second career in tech. As my confidence grew, so did my willingness to try new challenges. I was asked to take on a leadership role for the local women in tech community. And over the ensuing 5 years, I helped grow the organization from 300 members to 2,300 members. I started speaking at conferences and writing for the 10 Forward blog, in large part because of my experiences with Write Speak Code, which really encourages that kind of engagement. I received a few raises, some promotions over the years, and I learned a ton, but I decidedly avoided having anything to do with management or being in charge. I still was like, nope, not for me, putting my fingers in my ear, no, I can't hear you, not doing it. I just didn't think I would be good at it. I didn't think I would like it. I didn't want it. Then this happened. I had a lot of growing up to do, right? I mean, that's just true. Partially because I'd worked in places that didn't give me a healthy sense of what a workplace should look like and how supervisors and colleagues work together in a supportive way, right? I didn't know what that looked like, so I didn't know how to do it. Another part was this would mean a big shift, right? One time when my twin sister and I were drinking, she told me she admired how brave I was. That was her word. For moving around the country a lot, changing industries, quitting jobs that were unfulfilling without a backup plan, leaving jobs I hated to go backpack around South America for a few months. Those are all choices I made though, right? I didn't think of that as bravery because a lot of them specifically involved not committing to something, right? And a part of me was afraid to let go of that life, of being able to, feel like I could do what I wanted, travel around, not be tied down to one place or job. But again, looking back, there was a lot of risk in that lifestyle that I didn't necessarily realize at the time. So periods with no healthcare, or as I mentioned, just catastrophic health insurance, hardly any savings, spotty employment record, nothing for retirement on top of the student loans that I was still carrying around from undergrad. Becoming a partner at 10 Forward would mean giving that lifestyle up. Yeah, I could still travel, work remotely, do all those things, but if I was going to commit to being co-owner of a business that was rooted in a specific community and really involved in that community, that meant that at least for the near future, I was also tying myself to that community. I didn't want the responsibility that came with more of a management type role because I'd been burned before. But in focusing on the effort or the work involved with that role, I was also missing out on all of the opportunity that such a role could bring. Like the opportunity to change the makeup of my workplace. When I started at 10 Forward about 6 years ago, we were 0% people of color and 28% women. Now our team is 30% women of color and 66% women. And part of that was that I was given the trust and the opportunity and the space to overhaul a good portion of our hiring process, change what questions we asked, change how we posted our jobs, where we posted our listings, who we were advertising to, what we were looking for in candidates, all of those things. And I love my team now. Not that I didn't love my team before, but you know what I mean. I also used my position as a co-owner in the couple of years since that happened to initiate salary transparency in the company. And there were some growing pains for existing staff when we did this, but new hires since have talked about how grateful they are that we have this in place, because research has shown that it increases wage equity for underrepresented groups. And then I've also been able to help guide the clients that we work with. So not only using connections that I have to bring in clients with some kind of social good component, but also advocating against clients that don't match our values. So some of the clients that we've worked with have, we build a job site for people who are and have been incarcerated. We've done a lot of projects related to equity in schools. I've been able to bring in some nonprofits and do some pro bono work using one of our platforms. Just a lot of really cool work that it would have been difficult for me to feel like I had the authority, permission, whatever you want to call it, to do that. And I wouldn't have had the confidence to bring it up likely before. Civic engagement. And with great power comes great responsibility, which is true, but also great privilege. And I think this is something that gets swept under the rug sometimes. So I've spoken at conferences in 3 different countries. Increased confidence, I mentioned that earlier. And more importantly, I think a sense of purpose. And then also learning to recognize and value the power of my person and my background, my experiences, what I bring to the table, and know that it is valuable despite years of messaging telling me that it wasn't. So I'm really happy now. I love my job. I love my coworkers. I love the work that we're doing. It's really fulfilling. And I know that switching to tech was the best thing that I could have done. But it took me a long time to get there. So in the end, what was it specifically that made the difference, that helped me to, get out of my own way and allow myself to be happy and to take on challenges that would lead to where I am now? One of the big ones is spite. So this is something that I see a lot on tech Twitter, especially like Black and women tech Twitter. Spite-driven career development. So the idea that because someone says you can't do something, you aren't good enough to do something, fighting against that voice in your head that says, oh, they're probably right. And instead being like, fuck that. No, I'm going to do it even better now just because you said I can't. So the key here, I think, is kind of like, don't settle, right? I settled for multiple jobs where I was underpaid, undervalued, mistreated, because I thought I couldn't do better and I was scared of trying. And so the same way with a relationship, if you're not happy, if you don't feel appreciated, like, find something different. Don't settle. Talk to your friends. I think community is a huge part of this. Your friends often know your strengths and your weaknesses better than you do and can give you a more accurate assessment of what you may or may not be good at. So this is a picture of one of my best friends, Caitlin, and I at a Right Speak Code conference. And they're the person, whenever I say, oh, this opportunity came up, I might apply, or like someone asked me to speak at this conference, but I don't know if I'm good enough for that. They're the ones saying, nope, you are. Look at all these other things you've done in your past. You could talk about this. You could use this to make it work. Like you did this, which is very similar. Like you're going to crush it. Go do it. And I think everyone needs that kind of cheerleader. Even more than that, if you can find a community of cheerleaders, so much the better. So finding a community that supports and validates you and your experiences is immeasurably important. For me, that's been Right Speak Code. That's been Madison Women in Tech. And if you're in an area where a community like that doesn't already exist, create it. build your own, bring other people in, because I can guarantee there are folks in a similar position to you who just need to hear someone else say that what they're experiencing isn't okay, or that what they're experiencing is valid, and how can we get through it together? It's okay to fuck up, and inevitably you will. So this is a command that we use in Rails, cap production deploy rollback, which does what it sounds like. It rolls back a deploy to production. I've used this 3 times in my life, and all of them were terrifying. It's 3 of the worst moments of my tech career. But we have this command for a reason, because we expect to use it, right? It's okay to mess up. We have mechanisms in place to help us when that happens, whether it's Rails commands or family or friends or partners or pets or your coworkers, right? It's okay to mess up. And kind of related, it's okay to change your mind. At very few points in my life did I have any idea what I wanted to be doing in 6 months, let alone a year, 5 years, 10 years. And you don't need to know that, right? You can always change your mind. And then finally, it's all about the baby steps. It took me, oh, how many years? I should have done this math beforehand. What, like 16 years to get back into tech from when I first started exploring it. And if I had just decided, well, I didn't do it at the beginning, so now it's too late, I think my life would look very differently and in a bad way. And so you don't need to know where you're going. You don't need to know how you're going to get there. It's just taking one step at a time, seeing if you like it. If you do, take the next step. If you don't, right? Pivot, iterate, change it up, try something different. Don't settle. Find what you want, try to get out of your own way, and I promise there's a happy path for everyone. Thank you.